Hello and welcome to Re-Vera. We're going to have some fun today. So I was recommended to check out the Darkstream's channel as good stuff to respond to. And he's got a lot of pretty radical takes. He's somewhere, depending on who you're asking, he's between alt-right and full-blown Nazi. Probably a full-blown Nazi. So he's definitely a white supremacist, definitely in favor of an ethno-state. So yeah. I'm looking forward to responding to all of his stuff. But in the meantime, the first thing I did, I saw he was live after somebody had mentioned this to me, so I clicked into it. And the stream was titled Demolishing Darwin. And he didn't. Newsflash. He didn't even... It was actually, like, he barely talked about it. It was really crap. I'm not even going to respond to that video because it was crap. But what I will do is... respond to his 7 reasons to be skeptical of evolution. Which, so, if you follow somebody like Fox Day, hopefully we'll get some Fox Day people in here. If you follow somebody like that and they're radically, arrogantly wrong on a serious issue, you should probably be skeptical of the rest of what they have to say. You know, I'm not saying that you're wrong on everything just because you're wrong on one thing, but somebody who's arrogantly wrong on something that's clearly demonstrable, there's a problem with that. So you need to not trust that person and what they say so much. Maybe put a little bit more research into it. All right, can you guys hear me all right? Everything coming through okay? All right, I wanted to start with a little logic test here. This, I think, is very demonstrative of some key principles. And it comes up because Vox likes to pretend he's logical and that he's, you know, all into the logics and the maths and the sciences. And he's not. And this is going to demonstrate something that I feel like is probably going to come up in this video. So this is a little logic question. So here's the question. I have 2 dice, 1 red, 1 blue. I roll both and tell you that the red dice shows 6. So what are the odds that my total roll is a 12? Is that better? I did turn down. Hello? Okay, that should be better. Turn it up just a little bit more. Okay, so what are the odds that your total roll is a 12? Well, obviously 1 in 6. That's easy. Second part. Okay, now I roll the same 2 dice and tell you only that at least one of them shows 6, but not which one. What are the odds that I rolled 12? That seems really obvious. Right? It seems that should be 1 in 6, but it isn't. I promise you. And the reason I love this particular thought experiment is it really gave me some. It gave me. Let me turn. Okay, how are we doing? Hello, hello. That definitely turned it up. Is this not coming through? Ah, shit. I think it's picking up the wrong audio source. All my shit's getting messed up. Just a second. Does it sound better? Did the changes I made do anything? Okay. Oh, shoot. Sorry about that. Okay, so, yeah, I've been trying to try my other computer and see if that works better, and so I was moving stuff around, and somehow my audio settings in OBS got reset. So it was using the wrong mic. Sorry about that. You guys, everything come through okay now? How's that sound? It looks like it should be good now. Okay, I think we're good. All right, so let me start over. So Darkstream is talking about evolution, and he talks a lot about the logics and the maths and the sciences, and he likes to pretend he's a rational person. He's not. So this is really demonstrative little logic experience that taught me a lot, because when I first saw this, I made the mistake of debating it with some serious mathematicians. I was so sure I was right. There's no way this could be the case. But I already read it once, but I have 2 dice, 1 red, 1 blue. I roll both and tell you that the red die shows 6. What are the odds that my total roll is 12? It's 1 and 6, clearly. Now I roll part 2, question 2. Probably put that. I roll the same 2 dice and tell you that at least one of them shows 6, but not which one. So what are the odds that I rolled a 12? Well, that seems like it'd be really obvious. It seems like the answer would still be 1 and 6. But it is not. And I debated it. I came up with all kinds of really interesting and complex rationales for how I was right. And it's interesting because if you think you're right and you're reasonably intelligent, you can come up with some pretty rational sounding rationalizations. And this is pretty common. And I had like a bunch of people jumping in on my side. They were all starting to agree with me and think that I might be onto something here, and that maybe the other people were wrong. And it started this whole debate in the thread. It ended up having like hundreds of comments. But I had a friend who was on the other side of the debate, and I did know he was a mathematician that works for NASA. So the moral I took from the whole story was intellectual humility. Maybe, just be a little humble and be like, maybe I could be wrong here. So that's one of the morals you learn from this. The other moral is math is dictated by the variables you're using. And if you're missing a key variable, a key axiom, your result will be wrong. So you think it's 1 and 6, possibly. Perhaps some of you are smart enough to not get the wrong answer. But if you're missing the axioms that you need to make this equation work, you're going to have the wrong answer, and the correct answer will seem absurd to you. I was getting into this in the debate with the young balloon earther. I was trying to make the point that very complex things can seem absurd to you if you don't have enough foundational knowledge. And you can get a surface level understanding of complex topics that makes it understandable and not so absurd, usually. But if you think a whole complex subject is absurd, and there's a bunch of experts, a consensus of experts that are telling you that you're wrong, you might be the one who's wrong. It's important to have that intellectual humility. And this is what was happening to me. So anyway, they were trying to prove the other side of this for quite a while. And I'm going to come back to this because I think I want to get some answers from you guys. I want to know what you think the answer is. So think about that. What are the odds that you rolled a 12? And they were coming at me with all kinds of like Bayes equations, probability equations, and it was too complicated for me. Like, I'm not a mathematician. I know some basics maths, and this seems like it should be basic math. And that's the thing. If you're coming to somebody who's disagreeing with an expert consensus, and you're trying to use complex rationale, they're not going to get it. So this is why, with my debate in the young balloon earther and other people like that, I'm trying to keep things as simple as possible. Like, this is a rhetorical tact. Like, I try to make my arguments as simple as possible so people can understand them. And I try not to appeal to complex areas like radiometric dating. Like, people don't trust that because they don't understand it. And you can make that point, but it's more difficult. I like to appeal to simple things you can see with your own eyes. So I'll get into that. But I did want to before I get into responding to his video, I wanted to make a case for evolution. Because he's just gives 7 reasons he's skeptical of evolution. Well, you can't get into why you're skeptical of evolution if you're intellectually honest, which he certainly isn't, if you don't first understand the reasons why we believe evolution is true. Because evolution is the accepted model in biology, and there is no competition. There is no other model. It is the only theory that explains all the data, period, and full stop. It cannot be falsified at this point. Parts of it can be, but the overall theory is so rock solid. Literally speaking, there have been hundreds of thousands of scientists that have put their life work into researching this since Darwin over the last 150 years, and many of them trying to prove it false. And they have all failed. There is zero evidence that falsifies evolution, and it has made a whole lot of accurate predictions. So it literally, you can show elements of it wrong. You can change time frames a little bit, but the overall model is very well validated, and we'll get into that. So this is the argument I like to make to people, because most people don't even understand evolution. So we're going to make it very simple for you. And, my viewers currently probably already are fairly familiar with evolution, but this is useful to you if you need to explain it to somebody. So hopefully this will be useful to you, I should say. Close that. But parents have young, mostly similar to them, but not exactly the same. See, this is something we can see with our eyes. We see people have kids. We see animals have kids if you're on a farm, and they're similar, but they're not exactly the same. Now, obviously, the differences that can be passed down are what we call mutations. But I'm like getting away from even like any kind of word that people might not clearly understand. But we know that many of those minor differences can be passed down in the genetic code. And then the third one, natural selection is a competitive pressure on which changes are passed down and become prevalent in a population. So this is getting a little bit more complicated. But this is the core of evolutionary theory, and there are other elements that involved too in how genetics shift over time, but that's a core one. I have a whole separate thing I'm going to go into about that to expound on that if people are skeptical, but so I'll come back to that. But fourth, the Earth is at least hundreds of millions to billions of years old. Again, I'm avoiding specific dates because you don't get to a specific date without a whole lot of science that is out of reach to lay people. So this is all. You can get to all these places with no faith in science, just kind of verify it for yourself. So that's millions of generations worth, well, if not billions or trillions of generations worth of slow accumulation of changes guided by natural selection. That's a lot of small changes accumulating over time. And that's important. And this is the key, because any time, if you've ever listen to anybody who's skeptical of evolution or a creationist, they always say that, I agree with microevolution. I just don't believe in macroevolution. And what they're doing is they're reversing the burden of proof. It's a fallacy. If you make a claim, you have a burden of proof on that claim. But given the fact that you have microevolution, that's already demonstrated. The null hypothesis would be that step would continue. It's like saying, well, just because you can walk 100 feet doesn't mean you can walk 10 miles. No, it does, though. Unless you can show a barrier stopping you. If I have 10 miles of flat highway and I have a pack and I have water and I have food, I can walk 10 miles. And walking 100 feet is pretty good demonstration that it's probably possible I can walk 10 miles. Unless you show a barrier for why I can't walk that far, then I can probably walk that far. And that's where we get to with evolution. We have microevolution. So the point 5 is if there is no known barrier stopping the known evolutionary progression, and all the DNA and fossil evidence indicates that there has been no barrier, as we all seem to have come from the same common ancestors which diversified into all the species that live today or went extinct in the past. And we have seen this. We have observed this in species with short life cycles as well as other species with longer life cycles. Creationists like to just deny reality. They like to pretend that evidence that clearly exists just doesn't exist. There's literally so much evidence for evolution, you could not process it all if you spent your entire life studying it. That's how much there is. That's why there's so many specialties in biology. You can't just learn all of biology. That's ridiculous. There's so much knowledge we have. And they throw it all out and say nothing exists. So we want to show a few concrete examples today, but there's far more than that. So this is a basic case for evolution. And these last three are the controversial ones. These are the three that you'll get pushback on from creationists. So for natural selection, let's go into a little bit more detail about that. This is like quality rebuttal stuff. If you ever, and not just rebuttal, like if you are, if you're talking to your buddy or family member and you find out that they don't really believe in evolution, or you just met somebody, like this is good, like way to rebut in conversation. Like this is important. Truth matters. And if you don't understand how life got here and the very core of biology, you really are missing on a lot of life. Knowledge enriches your life. And if you see, I grew up young Earth creationist, so I did reject all this. So I understand what I'm missing. Like every time you go out and you're in a museum or you're at a national park and they have a sign, and there's always like hints of evolution and age on everything, and you have to like consciously reject all this stuff. And it affects so much of your life, actually. It's like, oh, this isn't true, and this isn't true. And how can you not start to think in a conspiracy kind of mode if you're rejecting all of science, which almost all of science is supporting evolution. So it's, if you reject evolution, it will affect the rest of your life. So don't reject it without very good reason, and as we'll demonstrate, there is no good reason. So anyway, natural selection. Evolution by natural selection is logically necessary, which is a strong claim, requires a strong burden, but I'll demonstrate. But it's logically necessary given imperfectly replicating code-based organisms in a finite system. So each one of those words is important. Step 1, it is impossible to have infinite multiplication of a population in a finite system. Yes? I mean, that's, if you understand the definition of infinite and finite, that is necessarily implied. This is definitional. It is absolutely true that you can't have infinite multiplication in a finite system. Secondly, if you have replicating organisms, these are multiplying. So it's like you have 2 and then you have 4 and then you have, 52 billion, like in no time. If you've ever done this with a calculator, stuff multiplies very quickly. And when you're starting with cells and they're multiplying, because every time they split, it's a multiplication, you're going to reach the limits of this finite system very soon. What happens then? Well, there's no communication here at this point. Like birth control is a very recent invention. So, of course they have to compete. They're competing for resources. Like the first cells weren't necessarily eating each other, but they were certainly competing for resources, and cells that couldn't get enough resources to survive died. That competition is inherent. It is logically necessary that it must happen because of the multiplication in a finite system. Since they're imperfectly replicating and code-based, there will be many differences. So this is key. So you have all these organisms multiplying, but every time they multiply, they're not exactly the same. So this was the first point in the evolution little mini argument. There's little differences, and not all these differences matter. Some of them matter, some of them don't. Most of them are detrimental or neutral. But every once in a while, you have one that actually helps you in a specific niche of the environment. Because how could it not? Like, if it's actually random and the code is just changing, then yes, most of it will be garbage, but you only need one out of thousands or more to be beneficial, and that one becomes prevalent in population because it's helping them survive and replicate. Those that best survive and replicate will best survive and replicate, and their code will come to dominate the population. How could it not? This is what I don't understand about everyone who debates evolution, and they don't make this point. Because how could it possibly not? Think about it. In what possible barrier, what possible way would limit this natural selection from happening? It's logically necessary. It must happen. These are logically necessary given nature, math, logic, whether there's a God or not. And given all of this, it will have the appearance of design. The end product, the end species, life, will have the appearance of design because they've evolved to best survive and replicate in their ecological niche, whether there's a God or not. So that's all very basic. The age of the Earth argument, that's very simple. I went over that in the Young Earth thing, but the Grand Canyon is my favorite because creationists like to try to use it as evidence for their own case. And they do this because they recognize the threat of it. Because if you just go to the Grand Canyon, it looks old. So what they do is they try to explain it so that to kind of overcome that objection before it happens. But their explanations are hilariously bad, like you saw in that debate. But, you know, I'm glad to debate that issue with anyone else who wants to, because they are hilariously bad. So I won't get into that a whole lot more now. But then they might try to claim a barrier, but I've never really seen a model that makes any sense as to what could be a barrier here. And the primary barrier that, well, okay, the barrier they present is that the mutations never add information. There's no such thing as a beneficial mutation, which is just, again, denying reality, because there is a bazillion demonstrable cases of beneficial mutations, of mutations that add information. And they have to redefine the information in a way that makes no sense, because we see that happen all the time in a lot of different ways. And I highly recommend, if you do get into any of these discussions with anybody, every single point you've ever heard from a creationist is going to be on talkorigins.org. So this one I've obviously been to, and they have a whole lot of studies and whatnot demonstrating information being added. So it's just not true. It's made up. It's something they claim with for no good reason. So that's the starting argument I use for evolution. Now, I said it in the point 5 here that we have DNA and fossil evidence, and a lot of species that went extinct in the past. So this is what you have to realize. You know, nobody told us exactly what happened. If you believe otherwise, that's another discussion. But we kind of evolved sentience, and we got to figure this stuff out. So you look around, and there's a whole lot of fossils. At this point, they've determined over 99% of all the species that have ever existed have gone extinct. So you look at all the species of life that exist today, and there's 100 times more of those in the past, at least, if not more. They posit likely trillions of species, because most of them don't leave fossils behind. So they look at all these species and all these fossils, and this doesn't fit within a creationist timeline. This makes no sense. I wanted to show you guys this. If you've never seen this, this is really cool. This gives you a sense of the scale of how many species there are, including the extinct ones. And, you know, not all of them, like a whole bunch of them aren't even found. But this is basically a Tree of Life project where they're actually trying to put all of the Tree of Life on a literal Tree of Life. It's super freaking cool. It's onezoom.org. And I need to remember to put all these links in a comment. I should do that at the bottom here just so I don't forget. Okay, anyway, so check it out. So these are some rodent type of things. Little guys like that. And they have ages and species. And then there's more, and you can see these other little branches, which if I click down into, you can get down in there and see what they are. And there's more. There's some more rodents. More rodents. More rodents. And zoom out some more. Oh, there's some rat. Praxemes, water rat. I mean, most of the species you're not even going to recognize because there's so freaking many of them. But you keep going up. Lots of rodents in the world. Mole rats. All kinds of stuff. Keeps going up. And you can see all these branches we're like just ignoring. They just disappear off into the distance. There's so much to this. It's amazing. And go up again. Now we got some beavers and whatnots and chinchillas. Squirrels, pikas, rabbits, rodents, primates, and more. Marsupials, elephants. So this is mammals, which is, you know, what most of what we can think about when we think about animals is just, you know, this little branch over here. But we go up and now we have whatever the heck those are, and turtles, and amphibians over here looks like, and crocodilians and birds, lungfishes, bony vertebrates, fishes. Don't even know what those are. Starfish. It just keeps going and going and going and going. Isn't this wild? It just keeps going. So you can't even see the little mammal branch. We've gone so far past the mammals. Now we're at animals. Like, this is all of animals. But it keeps going. And there's more. Animals and more. There's all this other stuff. And that's the whole tree. Isn't that wild? So yeah, there's a lot of species of life. And when you start looking at them all, it's hard not to make comparisons. They clearly lead one from the other. So let me see if I have... do I have those pictures up? So you can see the picture over here of the skulls. Like, this is a very common picture you see. And this is for human evolution. Like, these are skulls we've found. So if you find these skulls with skulls like this in lower layers and then progressively getting closer to modern, and as they get closer to modern, they look closer and closer to human. How do you... Plus the background information that we are changing slowly over time, and we are accumulating changes. Like, we know that's true. So, unless there's some barrier preventing it, but then we look at the fossil record, and it sure looks like there's no barrier. It just keeps adding up. It's one of these that showed the fossils in the, like, geologic column in the strata. So yeah, something like this. So this is what you find. You have these layers that go throughout the earth, and we've mapped out the strata of most of the planet because we're looking for oil. So they do drill core samples and they map out the different types of sediment because it's all very important for oil exploration. It's a science because you have to figure out which layers were like swampy and had a whole lot of plant mass, and where the oil would accumulate after it's generated and pressure and all this kind of stuff. It's an interesting study. I have friends who are into it, like, professionally. But anyway, because of that, we've mapped it all out very well, and we know these layers, and these layers are all laid down in the same epoch, the same age, and they're on top of each other. And obviously the bottommost layers, unless there's evidence that one layer is pushing up over another, which sometimes obviously happens with plate tectonics, but in which case, if you have a layer like this, and this one goes like this, you can still tell that this one's older. It's just pushing up over this one. So you can figure out which layers are the oldest just by where they are. And looking at the age, like, not radiometrically, which you can do that as well, but just from the order you find them in the rock, you can then see that they're progressing in an evolutionary way towards current life forms. So this is observed. This is what we see in nature. All right, let me catch up on some chat before I get into some Vox Day. Yeah, he's bad. He bad. Oh, so some of you might have come into this stream without having actually read the description for this video. So I got to set you guys straight. Where did I have that? Alrighty. So if you go to Vox's channel, I don't want to lose this, so I'm just going to open up a new one. Rather than tell you, I'm just going to show you, because this is insane, I think. But you go to his channel, and you go to About. Home of Vox Day, Supreme Dark Lord of the Evil Legion of Evil. Commander of the Dread Ilk. And Master of the Vile Faceless Minions. So, somebody's dedicated to LARPing, and I mean, it's just pathetic. He's compensating for something. Who thinks of himself like that? And if you watch his live streams, like I was listening to a bit of his one from today, and he's like literally like, I will tell you of the Vile Faceless Minions what to do, and you will mindlessly do it. He's like, I mean, yeah, there's obviously some humor here, but he's telling them to mindlessly do things without reason and to trust him, and that's not a joke. It's kind of fucked up and pathetic. Yeah, I don't know, Dorian. So Dorian says, I bet Vox Day doesn't even care whether evolution is true or not. He just knows denying it turns people into far-right crackpots. And Nazis want to appeal to everybody. This is Vosh has been doing a lot of good videos on problems with the left and what the left needs to do better. And he's definitely right, because fascists try to appeal to every segment of the population they can, because they're trying to win. We as leftists need to do the same thing. We need to try to appeal to everybody. And like, I don't have anything against people who follow Vox Day. If you think he's intelligent, you've seen his stuff, you like him, cool. Like, I don't blame you. I've been there myself. The thing is, if you're not seeing both sides of an issue, it's really easy to get deluded by your bias because you've only seen one part of it. So in this video, I'm going to attempt to show the other side. And so I think he just really is skeptical of evolution because has flawed epistemology, as evidenced by like everything else he believes, which is all bad and demonstrably so, and I will demonstrate. But he's skeptical of evolution. He is less of a crackpot on evolution than on other things. So he very clearly tells people in his audience that they're morons if they think the Earth is 6,000 years old or under. He accepts things like ice cores. He doesn't accept, like, from what I saw, like the actual age of the Earth. But he says it's, we don't know exactly, but it's definitely not 6,000. But he's appealing to people who are skeptical of evolution without trying to draw a firm line, because he doesn't want to lose people who know evolution's true either. So this is fascism. And yeah, that's that for that. So anyway, this is the first one I watched, The Demolition of Darwin, in which he does not demolish Darwin. And I commented, I would, just so you guys all know, and Vox Day, if you watch this, or any of his supporters watch this, I have challenged you. I would love to discuss this in person. You're wrong. I mean, all of science shows you wrong. So it doesn't take a genius. I'm not claiming to be a genius. It doesn't take a genius to debunk you, no matter how smart you are. If I'm a dumbass and you're a genius, I can still debunk you when I have all of science on my side. It's not freaking hard, and I will. And he actually responded to that. No, you wouldn't. You would be humiliated. Well, here's the thing. If I'm shown to be wrong, I'm not humiliated because I value truth. Truth matters. If I'm wrong, I want to know. That's why I pursue debate with people who I disagree with. Now, I'm not going to be shown wrong because it's not my theory. I didn't come up with evolution. I'm not personally invested in it. I don't give a shit. I didn't believe in evolution until I was 28 years old. I would be happy to go back. But you're not going to prove all of science wrong. Most of science. So neo-Darwinian theory is serious science, and it is, yes, it's not all of science. I was being hyperbolic, but a whole heck of a lot of science, like most of biology. It's the foundation of the field of biology. So anyway, let's just get into his video. And oh crap, it's all right. Here we go.
That I am a evolutionary skeptic. That just gives you a little bit of background on one of them. Okay, so my 7 reasons are as follows. First, the evidence for it does not exist.
He talks really slow.
There is considerable evidence of various species that no longer exist, but there is virtually no evidence of specific transition between one species and another. Second, the historical timelines that purportedly support the...
Okay, so he started off by, like I said, just denying reality. The evidence doesn't exist. Like, all of the hundreds of thousands of people who've studied it over the last 150 years with their entire life's work, and I don't know, lots of peer-reviewed studies on this, and nope, it just doesn't exist. Like all of the clear progression in fossils, all of the documented beneficial mutations, it doesn't exist. Like this is lazy debating. Like if you're trying to take down a scientific consensus that's as strong as evolution is, trying to start with the evidence doesn't exist is pathetic. Come on now. Like this is burying your head in the sand. Oh, it doesn't exist. Come on. He should be. He's either lying or he's ignorant, because it's very clearly true.
Backtested theories are dynamic, and the level of dynamism, the amount that they change, is so great that it is impossible to ascribe any value to them whatsoever. Let me give you an example. In 2014, I have to open up a different file just a moment. In 2014, they were beginning to start working on something that I drew attention to about 5 years before that. And it was interesting because I was involved in a minor debate with a biologist about evolution. And he was really confused. He didn't understand.
This is something creationists always do. I was having a discussion with a biologist. Really? Who? When? They make up shit. They just make up conversations that I'm highly skeptical ever happened. But even if they did, it doesn't prove anything. Like, it's one guy. Like, who knows what field of biology he was? Anyway.
The significance of his inability to answer my questions. I had a very, very simple question for him. I said, look, if you can answer this question, then I might well be convinced.
You think I'll be able to answer this question? I'm not a biologist. Let's see.
That evolutionary theory works. He said, okay, what's your question? I said, what is the average rate of evolutionary mutation? What is the average rate of evolution, to put it most simply? And he couldn't understand the question. He's like, well, that question doesn't make any sense. And it absolutely makes sense. There is an answer. There has to be an answer. And you should be able to at least give me some kind of range. And so, and he had...
well, yes, we can see the rate of change because we can see it in the fossil record and in the genome. Like and like the rate of change matches with what it's supposed to be. Like he never shows any evidence that it's not. So like I can't just say what a rate of change is. Like I said, I'm not a biologist, and it's obviously different for like every species. Like it's a little different in a fruit fly that has like a 1-day generation versus, elephants with their much longer generations. Right, and you're right, Dorian. Lots of questions don't have concrete enough answers to satisfy skeptics. But that's why it's important to start with the foundations of what we do know. That's why I started with that. This is something that's very, very important to understand. There is not competition to the theory of evolution. The theory of evolution is the bedrock of biology. Nothing else explains all the data we have. Nothing. So, creationism, like, you would have to posit that God's creating new species, like, constantly for some reason, and then letting them go extinct. Like, it's a lot of extra assumptions to put into this when we know these small changes are happening. So it's like, small change, small change, small change, extinct, new species, slightly different than the last one, small change, small change, small change, small change, extinct, new species, slightly different than the last one, created. Like, how's that a theory? Come on. Like, there's no reason to speculate that God's creating these species. Like, what else explains the data? Right, and he gets, I think, if I'm not mistaken, in this video, I listened to a lot of stuff today, and I was going through double speed and trying to work at the same time. But I think he gets into his math. That's why I wanted to do the dice example to start with.
No idea. He literally couldn't understand what I was talking about. And that made me...
Yeah, a biologist couldn't tell you the rate of change. Like, not everyone in biology studies the rate of mutations. Like, that's an absurd thing to expect a biologist to know. This is why I don't believe him. There's no details. He didn't say what branch of biology this is.
Me start looking deeper into it. And what I realized is that biologists do not understand the first thing about statistics. They do not understand anything about...
So he determined that biologists don't know anything about statistics by talking to one guy. But he knows about statistics.
About probability. What you need to understand is that, somebody just said they don't have the data. That's true, they don't have the data. But even worse than not having the data, they don't even have the educational background to begin to understand these issues. I actually went and checked. I checked a number of the Ivy League schools. I checked Stanford. I checked a number of other programs. You can go all the way through. If you get your PhD in biology, you will go all the way through, and you might take calculus. And you might take one beginning level course in statistics. They are not even... A PhD in biology does not have the math.
Okay. So I just looked this up. According to PhD Portal, there's 346 different PhDs you can get in biology. 346. Willing to bet each one of those still has different parts of their field they focus on. And he figures that they don't have statistics because he looked at, like, course overviews on websites and shit. Like, you don't know what they went into, and you don't need statistics for every branch of biology because biology is a very fucking broad field. It's mostly about bacteria and viruses and shit like this that affects our health. It's also about studying all the life that exists and categorizing it and discovering new species. And there's ocean life, and there's animal life, and there's insect life, and there's fungus life, and there's biology that gets into farming. There's so much of science that's biology. Like, they don't all need statistics, but some of them understand statistics pretty well, the ones that have it most relevant to their field. Oh, come on. I thought it was paused. It's just buffering. Well, I was afraid that would happen, so I came prepared. I'm going to give it... I actually downloaded this video so we can watch it that way if I need to, but it doesn't let me speed it up like I want to. So let me just try a refresh and see if that works.
If you get your PhD in biology, you will go all the way through, and you might take calculus, and you might take one beginning level course in statistics.
Hopefully I didn't
They
miss
are
you
not
guys.
even... A PhD in biology does not have the mathematical background of the average bachelor degree holder in economics, much less somebody who's actually doing math. They have no idea even how to understand these issues. They don't even understand how the statistics relate to their theories. They don't understand the significance of what the probabilities imply for them. Benjamin Agrignon asks, have you heard of John Milton's influence on Darwin? Darwin was, in a sense, creating a Victorian attempt at theodicy. Yes, I have. That's true, and that's why there's always been this religious aspect to it. K. Bear Chris says, I've noticed that the terms evolution and nature have become secular substitutes for creation and design. The fact is that they believe that in Darwinism as a secular religion, it has nothing to do with science. I wouldn't say it has nothing to do with science, but it has very little to do with it. Anyhow, so let's go on. So what we were talking about with the rate of evolution is we were talking about speciation. What is the rate? I wasn't asking just about speciation, but the way that scientists address this issue of the speed of evolution is they refer to speciation. Now, this is slightly nonsensical for reasons that I'll explain at some point, possibly not tonight, but we'll just run with it for now. Okay, so in 2014, in a piece called Human and Chimp Genes May Have Split 13 million years ago, it was determined that the ancestors of humans and chimpanzees may have begun genetically diverging from one another 13 million years ago. This is key. More than twice as long ago as had been widely thought. Okay? So, and Anath is actually understanding this because he said...
This is something pseudoscientists always do. They point to things that have changed in science as evidence that science is often wrong or not reliable. So the time frame changed, and that makes all of evolution not true. Well, the fact is that their models necessarily have to pave over some holes because the fossil record doesn't record everything. Now, certain species are very well documented in their evolutionary chain. If you look up whale progression, we have so many fossils along the way. It makes it very obvious what happens. But sometimes you have to fill in some holes because you go from this layer with this animal to this layer with this animal, and you can presume that this one came from this one, but there's not so many pieces in between. It's a puzzle, and we don't have all the pieces, but we have enough of the pieces to very clearly see what the picture is. Yeah.
TENS does nothing but track empirical adequacy. At best, it accounts for the phenomena, but cannot account for its efficient causality. That's why the biologist couldn't answer your easy question. Exactly. But what confused me about the biologist was that he actually believed that the question didn't make sense, and he didn't understand that there had to be an answer.
The biologist.
It's not even possible that the answer doesn't exist. We don't know the answer is a reasonable and correct response. But to say that...
we have a pretty good idea of the answer from the people I've talked to, from the studies I've seen, which I don't have all of in front of me, but it's like talk to a biologist who's in a relevant field. And in fact, his debate he had a debate with somebody else, and they went over his little argument here a little bit. I'll see if he fleshes it out more. Otherwise, I'll give a Cliff Notes.
Well, that question doesn't make sense, or there is no such thing. Both of those answers indicate that the biologist doesn't even understand what he's talking about. And so, so keep in mind, the ancestors of humans and chimpanzees began genetically divulging 13 million years ago, more than twice as long as had been widely thought. And then they explain how they've calculated this. And it's all based on statistics. The researchers found that humans and chimpanzees share very similar mutation rates, hold that thought, and from this data, the team were then able to calculate divergence rates. Our results indicate that human and chimp ancestors' genomes would diverge by about 0.1% every million years. So when we see a divergence of 1.2%, we infer that it must have been about 12 million years to 13 million years is our actual estimate. Okay, so they've done that. Oh, K. Bear Chris says, P.S. I've been on 3 dinosaur digs and will go again this summer. Paleontologists in the field digging with us will admit the gaping holes in Darwinism. Many must toe the line for federal money.
So, what kind of fossil dig do you think that was? Do you think this is, Harvard doing a fossil dig for people who are interested in that? No, I guarantee this is like Answers in Genesis or Institute in Creation Research funded, like a creationist fossil dig. And of course, the scientists there are going to be all like, yeah, I work at a university and I can't let people know who I am because I'll get fired. Like, whatever. Like, it's not convincing. Like, they literally have to believe there's a conspiracy to hide the truth. This is the dichotomy that I presented the last time. Trichotomy, if you will, depending on how you phrase it. But there's 3 possibilities. The expert consensus is all dumb. They're all conspiring to hide the truth, or maybe it's a complicated subject and you don't fully understand it. And I think 3 is pretty clearly more probable.
I didn't know that, but I'm not even remotely surprised. Okay, now let's go on. That was 2014. So in 2013, they've just more than doubled the amount of time required for speciation between chimps and humans, the divergence. Uh-oh.
So I was just Googling, by the way. While I was quiet here, I was trying to figure out how many biologists there are in the world. And the estimate I see here is about 400,000 U.S. biologists. So that's not even in the world. So there's a lot of biologists. It's a huge freaking field. Talking to one of them tells you nothing about the field.
Now, in January 22nd, 2019, just 5 years later, the average mutation rate of humans is approximately 1 mutation per 2 billion base pairs of DNA per year. In order to investigate whether chimpanzees experience similar rates, now remember, that was the assumption in the 2014 study. Humans and chimpanzees have similar rates. So what they did is they actually decided to actually study the chimpanzees. They sequenced the genomes of 9 chimpanzees, came up with different mutation rates, and it says if the mutation rates of apes are applied, the researchers estimate that the species formation that separated humans from chimpanzees took place around 6.6 million years ago. But if the mutation rate for humans is applied, the speciation would have been around 10 million years ago. So now we have 4 different numbers.
Yeah, depending on how you're coming at this. Like, there's obviously, we don't know everything. So you take the evidence you have and you try to come to a conclusion. So if you just look at the documented mutation rate we see today, and it's wild because they will tell you this about dating techniques that are reliable, but there's assumptions here. So there's a mutation rate that is fairly predictable, but you can accumulate a lot of mutations without becoming a different species. The speciation event has to be a very large mutation that makes it so you can no longer interbreed. That's the speciation event, and they happen rarely, and it's hard to predict when it's going to happen because they are rare. So just because you can look at the rate of mutations and predict that's probably going to be about 6 million years, but then you might do different research and fossils and who knows, and like backtracking the actual DNA and figure out that it was longer. So science changes, but it becomes more accurate. That's the point. Any field that is not accepting when it's wrong and correcting itself is not becoming more accurate. That's why religion isn't becoming more accurate in general. But science does. That's why we have such amazing science and knowledge of the world today, is because it admits when it's wrong and it corrects itself. And we need to do the same thing as individuals because truth matters. If you admit when you're wrong and correct yourself, you'll become more and more right. And Vox needs to admit he's wrong on these things.
In 5 years for the same event from 2 different groups of researchers. Think about the margin of error that is involved in this. Now consider chaos theory. Consider the very, very small...
Like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. So, again, look at all we know with the fossils, with the logic and the math I demonstrated that shows natural selection must happen, with the fossils we observe, with the genetic commonality we observe when we break down the DNA. We know evolution is happening. So then we try to make assumptions on mutation rates, and it varies a little bit depending on who's doing the math. Big whoop. That doesn't change the things we already know.
Amount of divergence that is required over a long period of time to completely render your estimates and calculations incorrect. Not only that,
a little variation
moving parts
does not make everything you believe incorrect.
Return of the Great Depression, I actually have a chapter called the N-body problem. And one of the problems in physics is that once you get to 3 bodies, it's very easy to calculate things with 2 bodies. Once you get to 3 bodies, the complexity of the calculation becomes such that it is virtually impossible to predict where anything's going to be or the precise relationship between them.
God, he's so dumb. So he's talking about chaos theory and how it makes things difficult to predict. Chaos theory is why you can't get a perfect prediction of weather like 6 months in advance. Like I can't tell you whether it's going to rain or be sunny on July 13th of next year, no matter how good a meteorologist I am and how much data I have. It's too far in the future. There's too much chaos. And that's extremely complicated. But that doesn't mean we can't predict anything. We have probabilistic models that are pretty accurate out to a certain point. So meteorology
Those
still
three
happens.
bodies.
And
In economics.
he's talking about economics. Well, we can predict some stuff in economics too. Like, just because things are complicated doesn't mean you can't make any predictions. It doesn't mean you don't know anything. It just makes it harder. There's more involved. It's more complicated.
There are so many moving parts that it's really an n-body problem. Any number of bodies, but it's more than 3, and there's absolutely no way that you're going to be able to calculate it correctly. So, in fact, there's a comment
No
here
way.
that is relevant. Bruiser Elite says, Vox, you're absolutely...
So all meteorologists and all economists better just hang up your shit, because there's no way you're going to be able to do anything with it, according to Vox
correct.
Day.
I have a maths academic background, and the biologists and other scientists, aside from physics and possibly chemistry, are completely unqualified. Note that, completely unqualified. They're so bad that Richard Dawkins was impressed that multiplying a billion by a billion was a lot.
Citation.
And so, did I miss this one? Oh no, I got that one. Okay, good. Where do they get the rate of mutation? Well, Peace Crusader said, isn't it possible that certain species mutate genes faster than others? Yes, it's absolutely true. They know that to the extent that they have measured it. Not only that, different people mutate genes at different rates. Men and women mutate genes at different rates.
Mm-hmm.
The level of the complexity is insane. The level of the complexity is off the charts. And so that's why all of these various numbers and stuff are hopeless. Eclectic actually...
he's getting lost in the numbers and forgetting what we know. That's why I started with what we know. So trying to explain how every detail of evolution fits together and fill in the missing pieces, that's a project science is working on. But that doesn't mean we don't have the 90% of the puzzle we already have. We already know a lot. He's getting lost in the math for mutation rates and making it seem like it's a bigger issue than it is.
Correctly anticipates one of the areas I'm going with this. The TENS people need to keep adding Ptolemaic epicycles to save their theory. That's right. They keep changing it. And here's the important thing.
He talks so slow. I'm going to speed this up even more.
Whenever you need to keep tweaking and modifying a theory, it's wrong.
God, that's dumb. Does it hurt to be that stupid, Vox? Does it hurt to be that stupid? How do you tie your fucking shoes? If you have to keep changing your theory, it's wrong? Like every field of science, including the ones we use today, have evolved over time because you don't start off with a perfect theory. Nothing works like that. Wow. Every field of science starts with some broad things that are true, and then they fill in the details. It's always changing, but it's becoming more accurate. It's like you're looking through a camera and it's not focused, and you're focusing it, and it's becoming more and more focused and more clear. That's science. We're a hell of a lot more clear. We've got down to the freaking atomic level. We got electron microscopes, and we got the massive telescopes, and we see the big things, we see the small things. We're pretty well focused right now, but we're still focusing in on some things. That doesn't make science wrong. That's the stupidest thing anyone can say about science. If you have to keep changing it, it's wrong. Wow. So apparently we should just throw out literally all of science if we're going to live by that statement. Holy shit, that was stupid.
From the history of science, a theory, it's wrong. Whenever you need to keep adding Ptolemaic epicycles to save their theory. That's right. They keep changing it. And here's the important thing. Whenever you need to keep tweaking and modifying a theory, it's wrong. This is something that we know from the history of science. Whenever you have a theory, a crude theory often looks reasonable. A lot of people don't realize, they talk, people thought that the sun revolved around the earth. Well, it was reasonable for them to believe that.
Science never did. People always this is the first thing people always throw against science, and I'm not going to fucking take it. I always push back on that because it's simply not true. Science is a method. Shit that happened before the method was started being used in the 1600s doesn't fucking count. That was the church that believed that. That was monks. That was not scientists.
Based on the available evidence, it did look like the sun went around the earth. You could build a reliable predictive model on that basis, and it worked. And the Ptolemaic system actually worked, And people were able to predict the movement of the planets. They were able to predict the various seasons and that sort of thing with this incorrect model. So, but what did they have to do once more and more information began coming in? They needed to start modifying the theory with all these epicycles. Well, maybe instead of just, rotating this way, it's also spinning and, turning on its axis in order to... They had to come up with all these complicated additional explanations, different tweaks to their core model in order for the model to continue to explain the evidence. And when you see that happening, that is a very, very strong indication that the core model is fundamentally incorrect. And that is what we have been seeing ever since genetics were discovered. That's why they don't actually talk.
Okay, that's dumb too. Darwin, 150 years ago, came up with a theory of evolution, and the main contribution he made, because there's parts of it that came before him, was the natural selection element and how that's a variable and how that does it. But they didn't know about DNA then. They didn't prove DNA for 100 years after that, until they had good enough microscopes to be able to actually demonstrate it. But they knew there had to be some kind of inheritable mechanism, and there's different theories of how that worked. But one of the predictions of evolution was that there would be some kind of inheritable mechanism that causes these changes to be inherited by future generations. That was a prediction they made that was validated by DNA. And not only that, there's a lot of predictions evolution made that were borne out by genetics, because it would predict that we have most of our code in common, and we do. It would predict that we would have more code in common with things that are closer to us evolutionarily, and we do. So, yeah.
Talk about Darwinian theory anymore. The correct term is the neo-Darwinian synthesis, because the original Darwinian theory was in contradiction to the Mendelian theory of genetics. And in fact...
they call it neo-Darwinian synthesis. Well, I mean, most of us just call it the theory of evolution. But that's because it's not just Darwin. It's been evolving, if you don't mind, since Darwin for the last 150 years as we get more information. So adding genetics to it was a huge step that's not part of his core theory. So it's not just Darwinian evolution anymore. There's more to it. And, there's, genetic drift and a bunch of different variables that go into it. It's not just mutations and natural selection, although that's the core of it.
There were plenty of people saying that Mendelian genetics was wrong. Reckoning said, debate JF on Evo. I don't think that's a very good idea.
He does debate
We had enough
him,
difficulty
and it's pathetic.
With the Israeli intelligence issue. I don't think that getting into math relating to probability and chaos theory is going to work very well.
So, nutshell on how that debate goes. You can look it up, but Darkstream Vox Day debates JF, who I don't know anything about him. He might be another Nazi. I don't freaking know. But they debate, and he has a bad voice. He's losing his voice. I'm probably going too soon. And he apparently knows a thing or two about genetics. I think he wrote a book on it or something. And so he's taking the pro-evolution side, and he's trying not to talk very much. So he kind of lets Vox, he's just giving him rope, and he hangs himself. And he lays out in much more detail this numbers argument, and he talks about the rate, and he talks about how we don't have enough time, but if the rate's faster, then we'd be able to observe it. So I don't know if he gets into it in this video, but he says that evolution is between a rock and a hard place, because if you argue that the rate of mutation should be happening faster, we should be able to observe it, but we don't, which is false. We do observe it. So first off, that half of your dichotomy is false. Secondly, that if it's happening slower, then nothing's going to happen because we run out of time. The Earth is only so old. So either way, you lose. Except we know how old the Earth is, and we know that we have adequate time to get to where we are. For one, because we're here, and there's no other model that explains it. And secondly, because the actual measured rates of change are... they happen. We see beneficial mutations. We have documented them. We see so many changes in evolution. In fact, one of the interesting studies I saw, they were studying yeast, and they actually witnessed yeast become multicellular, which is a huge evolutionary jump. So, I mean, claiming we don't observe this stuff is wild. But anyway, so he's making this claim about rates, and he does a lot of math, and about how this is the rate that they predict, and this is this, and there's not enough time, and it's too slow. And he's talking about studies they did in bacteria, and all JF says is, you're talking about bacteria. Like, as soon as you add the sexual component to it, it changes everything. Like, there are so many variables that he's left out of his equations. And that's, again, the dice experiment, because if you leave out variables or axioms, it throws everything out of whack. So he doesn't account for the fact that you can have a lot of mutations at the same time, because you have billions of base pairs of DNA, and you can have multiple mutations at the same time. They can be inherited together as a package as well. So this happens a lot faster. Plus, if you have one person or one animal that has a nice package of genes, and it gives them a significant advantage for survival and reproduction, they can spread that DNA to, depending on how the species propagates, dozens or scores or hundreds or thousands of other organisms through sexual propagation, whereas a bacteria can only double. So the not accounting for these things in his model is a fatal flaw. Like, that one observation from JF tanked his entire debate, like his entire argument. And he made it like at 10 or 15 minutes into it, and then Fox just goes on, and he's like, yes, well, that's true. But then he goes on for like half an hour without changing his argument. He doesn't understand that's a fatal flaw in his argument. You're making a mathematical argument, and it's pointed out that you're missing key variables that change everything, and you didn't update your model. You didn't go, okay, well, never mind. I guess my whole mathematical model's over, and I didn't have anything else, so, debate over. He just keeps talking for half an hour. He can't admit when he's wrong.
Peace Crusader says, but we don't have a core model to model the stock market correctly. That's correct. Does that mean market economics are wrong? Well, it depends. What are you talking in relation to what? I've proven.
Yeah, so that's a point that I made. Somebody in his chat made it, is just because things are complicated doesn't mean we don't know some things about it. So, we can't make perfect predictions in the stock market, but we can make some predictions, and we do know a lot of things about the economy. Just because things are difficult to predict doesn't mean you don't know anything. For instance, here's an economic prediction I can make with 100% certainty. Every day that goes by without a recession, we're a day closer to a recession. That's part of capitalism, and it's always held true. I'm quite confident with that one.
And that free trade theory is wrong. And you need to keep in mind, I'm accustomed, and I have proven my ability to dismantle theories that are widely accepted, that are older than the theory of natural selection. Now, going back to what we were talking...
I'm looking forward to looking into this claim, because he claims to have debunked an economics theory that's existed longer than evolution has. But I don't know anything about that, because I barely started looking at him.
About with regards to the epicycles, consider this. Do you understand that the theory of evolution is no longer the theory of evolution by natural selection? This is actually what it is more correctly described as. I'm going to go ahead and use... And so...
There are other mechanisms than natural selection. And if you're not including those in your model, which he doesn't, then your model's wrong. Like, those things change the speed of the mutation rate.
Is evolutionary,
and we witness them.
Because natural selection cannot account for these other observed changes to the genes. Anafa says, adding auxiliary hypotheses to your theory to rescue it again and again. Popper student Imre Lakatos did more than enough work on that area to show that.
This is a creationist assumption when you just can't imagine you're wrong. Every time you see something in science changing, you're making the assumption that they're rescuing the theory, that it's in trouble, and so they come up with new ideas to rescue it. It's not in trouble. Like, we know it's true. Just because elements of it are changed with somewhat doesn't mean the whole model's threatened. Because literally nothing is threatening it. There is no competing hypothesis. What else possibly explains what we see? What explains the genetic variation but similarity between closer related things? Like, how it's not a coincidence. It's I know. And yeah, if you like Vox Day and you follow him and you watch this video, please comment. He's probably not going to debate me, and I don't blame him. I'm a brand new YouTuber. I don't have much of an audience. I would be glad to debate him, and I would demonstrate him wrong, because that's not difficult. But I would be willing to debate you as well. If you're a Vox Day supporter and you question evolution, get on my Discord. I have links to it. I'll put a link to it in the description, and we can talk about it. Like, I'm perfectly willing to talk to anybody about this, because it's not hard to defend science. And if you want to be right, and you're tired of being proven wrong, you can change your mind. Like, why would you agree with this guy when everything he says is wrong, and demonstrably so? Like, he just looked like an idiot in all discussions.
That when that point is reached, the research program is likely dead. That's absolutely true. The mere fact that they are having to add gene flow and sexual selection and bias mutation and so forth to the theory means that
they're not having to add those things. They observe them happening, and they affect evolution, so they're added to the model. They don't have to add them. They observe them happening.
the theory is functionally dead. But not only that, the theory is irrelevant. It's totally irrelevant. People say, oh, it's the basis for biology. No, it's not. Nobody uses evolutionary theory. They certainly don't use it to predict anything. That was another question that I asked the biologist.
That's good. It's useless. Okay. I copied these from, I think it was his blog, but these are the actual, he's not, I don't think he's making it clear as he's jumping from one reason to another, but these are the reasons he gave. The evidence doesn't exist. Timelines are constantly mutating, which, again, A, the evidence does exist, clearly. B, historical timelines changing is a non-issue. And then the theories of complete failures or predictive model, that's just laughably untrue. Laughably untrue. We know so much about evolution and how the world works that they can look at fossils and strata, and they can predict, based on what type of age and what type of climate they are, they can predict where there's going to be oil, where there's going to be gas, and they've predicted where they're going to find transitional fossils. So they go, oh, we have this fossil, and we have this fossil. So I'm betting a good place to look for the one in between is going to be right over there. And they find it. This happens all the time. I did put some links here that debunk that. But, I mean, you can just do a search. Like, why would you believe anything an idiot like this says without just Googling to see if it's true? Like, why can't you just look at the other side? So yeah, there's a lot of predictions. I'm not going to read all these. It's irrelevant. You can read it on your own. There's a lot of predictions evolution makes, and so it makes predictions. It's scientifically and technologically irrelevant. There are no evolutionary engineers. This is one of the dumbest things anybody's ever said ever, because, again, there are over 400,000 biologists working professionally, and they don't do that without using evolution. Like, it's used in so many fields. You have to understand evolution in order to keep antibiotics ahead of antibiotic-resistant bacteria. They study evolution in how to use pesticides and herbicides for farms, because things evolve and they get more resistant to them. So they're constantly studying these things, and it affects so many different fields. It's amazing. It's amazing somebody would say something this stupid. But most importantly, and this is what really gets me, he doesn't actually make this mistake explicitly, but a lot of creationists talk about how they make the comparison between DNA and like coding, like software. And they say you can't have software without a software programmer. And they seem to be entirely ignorant of the fact that virtually everything you see, like every time you Google, the algorithm on Facebook, on Twitter, all of this technology you're looking at is guided by algorithms that were not programmed by a person. Literally, all the programmers do is they design selection pressures, and then they let the shit evolve on its own. It's literally evolution into action. That's an evolutionary engineer in my book. Like, they're designing they're building a system with That's what it is. Selection pressures. They're like, here's the selection pressures because we want to guide it in this direction. So we're going to put some selection pressures here and then just let the code replicate. And each new version, it creates bazillions of new versions with slight changes, and it kills off most of the ones. But the ones that are getting a little bit closer to where they're trying to go and it just evolves in that direction because the rest of them are getting eliminated. That's how AI works. That's how the algorithms work. That's how it's programmed. There's, I think, CGB Gray or whatever his name is, did a great video on that. But yeah, you can look up how algorithms are programmed. So to say that, so dumb. There's no such thing as evolutionary engineers.
What is the next stage in human evolution? He said, what do you mean? I said, we know that there is pressure, there's fitness pressure. We know that there are mutations. So which of those mutations are going to be, what potential mutations would be favored by the fitness pressure in our changing environment?
I'll tell you. I think a pretty good prediction is that we're going to have more and more women that are resistant to birth control, because that would be an evolutionary type of, we have this new selection agent, and if you become resistant to birth control and get pregnant and don't have an abortion, those genes are going to be passed down, and that's going to become more common. Now, we have slow generations, and birth control's only been around for a couple of generations. But I think that's a pretty safe prediction. If you understand evolution, it isn't difficult to make a few... it isn't difficult to make some predictions. We can also predict that the white skin is going to disappear. And this is why people like this asshole are concerned. But we're not going to disappear. Like, you're going to have grandkids and great-grandkids and great-grandkids. And you're going to be in their tree. And just like it would otherwise, it's just the skin's going to get slowly darker because the pressures that created the white skin no longer exist for the most part. And if, as white people go all over the world, it's more advantageous to, again, have a little bit more protection from the sun with the more pigment. Plus, we're not... Plus, as we're a more global society, there's more intermixing. So white people are going to disappear. Like, if you model this out, there's no scenario, no matter how much you try to create an ethno-state and preserve whiteness, it's going to disappear. And that's okay, because it's not like they call it the white genocide, as if the white people are getting all massacred, but they're not. It's just it's a natural shift in skin tone. Who wouldn't want a little bit more natural tan? I would. I'd be glad to have a little bit more tan. I'm white as shit. Like, what's the problem? Fucking fascist, man. Yeah, the biologists employed by the livestock industry, they are very knowledgeable about evolution, because farmers have been engaged, very, very knowledgeable about it. I mean, what's genetically modified organisms? What are GMOs if not evolutionary engineers? So stupid.
So why is evolutionary theory important then? We can't use it. It can't provide us with any predictive models.
It does, though.
He was understandably stumped by that. Let me go on to my next point here.
The biologist who didn't exist,
is that, except sometimes in a simulation test bed in order to evolve our combat AIs for Rebel Moon Revolution.
Wait a second. Did he just?
Ironically, I'm one of the few people who's probably used it in a way because we used a forced test bed in order to evolve our combat AIs for Rebel Moon Revolution.
So I forgot, he's a video game designer. That's one of the things he does. He's also a publisher of alt-right racist comics. But he does a lot of shit. He's a video game designer. I forgot about that. So he's literally been involved. He basically is an evolutionary engineer, and he said they don't exist. Oh my god. Like, yes, you've seen it happen with software. Why is it hard to imagine happening with DNA? Like,
it is scientifically and technologically irrelevant. Science is unreliable. Science is what
it's unreliable and useless and irrelevant, even though we used it in my video game that I designed. Damn it!
We call ideas that you don't know if they actually work or not. Once an idea, a scientific idea, actually becomes reliable, we use a different word to describe it, and that word is engineering. Have you ever heard about evolutionary engineering?
Which we do.
No.
Yep, you are one.
Reliable. Isn't the average rate of evolution what is usually called the molecular clock? Yeah, that is a term that is sometimes used for it. Fifth, theoretical epicycles are increasingly required. We already addressed that, but I think you understand it now. Sixth, it is a repeated failure as an explanatory model. It is amazing. It is astounding how often you will find even backdated predictions proven to be a failure. The best that they've ever...
Ah, crap. All right. I don't know. I doubt he's going to get anything interesting in the next 5 minutes here, but let's see. See if refreshing will do anything.
Explanatory model. It is amazing. It is astounding how often you will find even backdated predictions proven to be a failure. The best that they've ever been able to do is to cite that, well, one guy claimed that something, a mammal, I think it was E.O. Wilson, actually, if there was a mammal that evolved like an ant, like an insect, then it would have these characteristics. And then someone else said, oh my gosh, you're describing the naked mole rat. That is actually cited as a proof of the strength of evolutionary theory.
This is something dishonest actors do. It's also something that probably happens naturally. I don't want to always put intention behind things, but people arguing from the wrong side of things, pseudoscientists and whatnot, they typically like to put valid arguments that will be thrown up against them, and they like to phrase them as poorly as possible, strawman them, and mock them, which is what he's doing with this mole rat example, so that it kind of inoculates people. Because now if I go, of course the evolution's made a prediction, check out the mole rat, people will just laugh and they're inoculated against that when they haven't actually considered it and they haven't actually seen why that's a prediction of science. So I had that window up and I closed it, but it is absolutely a valid prediction.
That's ridiculous. He predicted nothing. The naked mole rat existed before he did. Are things that you predict about stuff that will happen in the future. Not
Okay, so that's dumb. So predictions have to be something that hasn't happened yet. But what about things that are happening but we don't know about them? We didn't know this creature existed. Like, he's saying you can't make predictions about the fossil record because they've been dead for so long. But we didn't know we don't know every fossil in the entire geologic column. That's ridiculous. But we can make predictions that say between here and here, we're probably going to find something that's between these two fossils. And then it happens all the freaking time. That's a prediction, even though the fossils have been there all along. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Not about things that, it's not about theorizing possible ideas and then somebody telling you that it was actually, that your idea actually exists already. That's not a prediction or a proof. Anaf says, when I took philosophy of biology as a university sophomore, the bio students in the class were total morons. Vox, you're totally correct regarding the point that the theory is not even used to make predictions. Somebody said I'm beginning to see why this guy doesn't do debates. Is that good or bad? Is that an...
You don't know the fuck what you're talking about. That's why you don't do debates.
an indication that you find what I'm saying compelling? Or
no.
Is it because I'm not organizing my thoughts properly? Christians cite the Bible in support of multiracial societies. How do I debunk? Very easily. Look at the nations. Look at the nations at the end in Revelation, and also look at the Tower of Babel. Is the breeding of canines used to try to predict outcome speciation? Well, there's some attempt to use the breeding of foxes to do it, but they're not changing foxes into anything. They're just affecting how the foxes behave. What they're actually trying to do to predict speciation is the fruit flies, because they've bred some ridiculous number of generations of fruit flies, and they've done all kinds of incredible things. But the one thing that they haven't been able to do is to turn a fruit fly into something else. They've got fruit flies without eyes, they've got fruit flies without wings, they've got fruit flies with a leg coming out of its head instead of an antenna. But what they haven't done is been able to get it to turn into something else. It doesn't work. And so, and then my seventh reason for being an evolutionary skeptic is, wrong one again, there we go. There is a very, very, very long track record of scientific fraud attached to evolutionary theory. It's nonsense. It's total nonsense. Now, again, I am not saying that it is absolutely and utterly ruled out. I am a very strong skeptic. I'm a much stronger skeptic.
Oh, well, so nice of you not to rule out the only explanatory theory we have in biology because nothing else explains all the information.
Skeptic than I was when I started. And yes, Vox, what do you think about red blood cells found in dinosaur fossils?
So, if you're more and more skeptic as you're looking into things, that's probably because you're only looking at one side of things. I'm pretty sure he considers himself a Christian. He talks favorably about the Bible and stuff like that in one of his streams. So I like I said, I'm kind of new to his content, but I'm pretty sure he has a vested interest here. I'm pretty sure a lot of people he knows are skeptical of evolution, and so when he goes into researching it, he's not doing it objectively. He's looking for his conclusion, and so yes, of course, he's becoming more and more skeptical of it over time.
Well, I think that's another indication that the timeline of dinosaur extinction is hopelessly, woefully off. That shouldn't even be possible according to their theories.
So that's a young Earth creationist argument, is that they found blood cells in dinosaur fossils, and that means they can't possibly be as old as they're claimed. And he's accepting that because he's an ignorant doofus. He doesn't know the fuck what he's talking about. The person who discovered these blood cells has explained them in considerable detail and has been for years and years and years. And she's a Christian, but she's shown up on a ton of people's YouTube channels to try to stop this stupid argument from proliferating, because that's not what her research showed. They found, like, it was a fossil and there was, like, organic stuff that they were able to reconstitute, and it looked something like blood cells, but they weren't blood cells. And there's nothing about her discovery that would be implausible given its age. Nothing. So, like, anyway, he's ignorant of it. Look it up. There's a ton of videos on it.
When you look at the number of epicycles that have been added to the theory, when you look at the amount of fraud, when you look at the total incompetence when it comes to statistics and when it comes to calculations, there's no way that this should even be taken seriously. It shouldn't be taken any more seriously than astrology.
And that's it.
No, I've got
Holy crap. His seventh argument. So just, I probably should have said this to begin with. This is not Darkstream's channel. He doesn't seem to have this video on any of his channels that I could find. I was looking for one that just talked about evolution. This is the only one, other than the debate that's over an hour long. So this is why I was using this video. So I don't know if this was cut out of context, but his last argument is there's a very long track record of scientific fraud surrounding it. Citation needed, bitch. Like, what the fuck? You make the claim and then there's, like, he doesn't give a single example. They always point to, like, they have, like, 3 cases of fraud they like to point to, which were usually, like, not scientists, or they were scientists, but they were always debunked by other scientists, by other evolutionary scientists who support evolution. And they debunked the fraud because they understood it so well enough, and its predictions, they're like, that can't be right. Like, that's the proof of the accuracy of the model, that they're able to spot fraud and call it out so much. But lay people haven't. Anyway. So that's Vox Day, and he doesn't know shit about evolution, but he's glad to tell everyone why they should be skeptical of evolution in spite of not knowing anything about it. I would love to discuss this more if anybody wants to. I'd love to, if you have any other videos to respond to on the subject. He's not the typical creationist, so he had a little bit different approach than some other people would. He's not a balloon earther, at least. But I'll be responding to some of his other content. I just need to find something that's fairly short, because when you're commenting on it live, it can get long pretty quick. So anyway, thanks for coming. Thanks for watching. Thanks for sticking it out, Dorian. I appreciate it. Yeah. Yeah, some people made up fossils. I mean, people do this because they can sell them, they can make money, they can try and get famous. And the hilarious thing is that, yes, there's a couple examples of frauds that weren't immediately debunked, and it took a little while to debunk them, but then they were debunked. And then the instant they were debunked, like, all of science rejected that shit. It disappeared. It wasn't in textbooks. Like, it was gone. But creationists, they fall for every fucking fraud in the book. and they don't correct themselves. It is hilarious. There are so many examples of fraud. Like there's what's the fucking name of it? There's these rocks that have like paintings on them that are found in I think it's like Mexico or South America somewhere, and there are some legitimate ones that are found that are from ancient civilizations, but there's also a lot of poor people there who make them to sell to tourists, and this is documented. And there's all kinds of crazy sketchings that include aliens and weird creatures and dinosaurs, and those sell, and people find them and they go, oh my god, it's proof of aliens or proof of dinosaurs cohabiting with man. And, and it's been debunked, and yet it still pops up. Like the balloon earther guy in his blog, he was making an argument from giants because he thinks there's giants. All of the claims of giant humans have been debunked. All these pictures of giant bones are Photoshopped. They've been demonstrated to be Photoshopped. It's really pathetic how often creationists fall for frauds and don't correct themselves. So you can't make the argument that evolution falls for frauds if you're not going to accept the creationists do, because they sure as fuck do. It's a perfect example of motivated reasoning. So, Dorian, I appreciate you hanging out. You gotta. What would you like to talk about? Are you on my Discord? Like, what do you want for make a request for a subject here? I appreciate you hanging out. Want to talk about something you're interested in, and if you have a video you'd like me to respond to, you've definitely earned the right. So let me know. I'm thinking one of my next projects. It might take me a minute, but I'm gonna make another video about my man Bernie Sanders, because we got to get on board that, and we got to help him when he's the only choice. We got to fight for him, and I don't give a fuck what his health condition is. I don't give a fuck what the polls say. I don't care what the media says. Politicians have been gaslighting us for too long, and we know that. It's been documented. Doesn't matter what anybody's policies are. I don't care if somebody's coming from the left of Bernie. I don't care if somebody has beautiful policies like Elizabeth Warren does. Those are just words. If you're not willing to fight for them and make them happen, then it doesn't matter. Bernie's proven a willingness to fight for what he believes in, and that's why we need him in office. And until we've failed, that's the only option. So we need to fight for him, and if we fail, then we'll reassess and figure out what we got to do going on forward. But if we don't get Bernie Sanders elected, that will cost an incredible amount of human life. I absolutely promise you. Electing the wrong president has cost hundreds of thousands of lives many times in the past, like George W. Bush killing hundreds of thousands of people in Iraq for no goddamn reason. But we're at the precipice of crisis in the planet. So I think our stakes are getting a lot higher. It could be in the millions or more, electing the wrong person. It's never been more important to elect the right person. We can't we can't risk this. We have to have him in. So anyway, thanks for coming, Dorian. And I'm planning on I'll probably do an actual prepared video for Bernie if I can. It's a project, but it's so important. We gotta do it. So I'm gonna try to contribute what I can and make my arguments and as compelling a way as I can, and fairly short package so it's easily shareable and watchable and all that cool stuff. But that's one of my next projects. I also want to discuss and debate with anybody I can. Somebody new joined our Discord today, and somebody I know from Facebook. And he and I disagree on gun control. We agree on pretty much everything else. So he's a great guy, cool guy. We've been friends for a long time. But we disagree on gun control, so I'm hoping we can have a discussion on that. And that'd be a very, very fun times. So anyway, thanks for coming in, and thanks for coming to the channel. Drop a like, drop a comment. I want to hear from everybody who watches this if we can. So let me know what your thoughts are. Any criticisms are welcome. I am happy to be wrong about anything, including my presentation techniques or what I said, or if I missed something. So feel free to pipe in. I appreciate the input. Thank you.